There are places in the jungle where maps don't show and where people never return. We slept next to one of them. I didn't grow up scared of the forest. Even now, I don't think fear is the right word for what I felt out there. Dread, maybe. A kind of slow dripping unease that starts as a tremor in your gut and coils inward like frost spreading over glass. I was 34 years old, unmarried, between jobs, and in need of something I couldn't name. I told people it was just a solo trip, one of those find yourself moments after the world's gone blurry. But the truth is, I was running. Not from anyone exactly, just from the weight of being somewhere I didn't belong anymore. So I packed up my Grand Design Imagine XLS travel trailer, nothing fancy, just enough room to sleep, read, and get lost, and I headed north through Oregon, chasing quiet. Rogue River Siskiyou National Forest sounded like the kind of place where silence still lived. No cell reception, no street lights, just trees, dirt roads, and fog that hung so low it felt like the forest was breathing. I found a dispersed campsite about 7 miles off the main highway. Nobody around but me and the trees. I parked on a slight incline near a bend in the gravel, popped out the slide, and stepped into the stillness. That first night was peaceful. Chilly, sure. Even for late May, the air dropped hard after sunset, but it was the kind of cold that wrapped around you instead of biting through. I had a propane heater, wool blankets, and the lull of crickets pressing softly against the trailer's skin. I remember thinking, this is it. This is what I came for. I woke up the next morning to nothing but mist and birdsong. I made coffee, took a few pictures of the fog curling through the Douglas firs, and started walking. No map, no destination. I just let the forest take me. About 3 miles in, I saw it. It wasn't immediate. The path narrowed, cutting through a section where the trees grew so tight it felt like a tunnel. Light filtered in like watery streaks. And then I noticed something swaying. At first, I thought it was just debris, maybe some old tin cans caught on branches, but as I got closer, I saw that they were bells. Rusted, handmade bells. Not wind chimes. Not ornaments. Real bells, the kind you'd expect to find in an old mission or tied to a cow in a forgotten pasture. They hung from nearly every branch of a single gnarled pine tree. Some were no bigger than my palm, others the size of a grapefruit, each one tethered with what looked like frayed leather straps. Dozens of them, maybe 100. None of them made a sound, not a whisper. No wind moved through that place. I stood there longer than I should have, watching them, waiting. The air felt heavier near the tree, like it pressed inward from all sides, as if the forest wanted me to leave but couldn't quite ask. I reached up and touched one of the bells. Cold, thicker than I expected. When I turned to leave, I noticed something etched into the trunk. Not with a knife, more like burned in, as if someone had branded the bark years ago and the tree had healed around it. The letters were old, jagged, partially obscured by sap, but I could still read most of it. Do not let the bells fall. That night, I couldn't sleep. Not from fear, at least not yet. It was just a feeling, the kind you get when you realize you might have crossed an invisible boundary. I left the lights off in the RV and sat near the window with a mug of tea, staring into the woods like I expected something to blink back. At one point, I told myself I'd imagined the whole thing. Maybe it wasn't that many bells. Maybe it wasn't even that eerie. Maybe I was just alone for the first time in a long time, and solitude was playing tricks. Then, just after midnight, I heard the first knock. 3 quick raps. Not loud, not insistent, just measured. It came from the back of the trailer. I froze, didn't move, didn't breathe. I waited for another. Nothing. Eventually, I convinced myself it was nothing. Maybe a branch falling. A pine cone. I went to bed with my heart rattling inside me, trying to believe my own logic. The next morning, I told myself I wouldn't go back to the tree, that it was just a weird little landmark and I had no business poking around something clearly meant to be left alone. But I went anyway. Same walk, same tightening of the path, same oppressive quiet. Except when I reached the clearing, one of the bells was gone. There was an empty strap swinging slowly like it had just been disturbed. The rest of them hung motionless. Silent. I scanned the ground, thinking maybe it had just fallen. Maybe an animal knocked it loose. But there was nothing. No bell, no prints, no drag marks in the dirt. And this time I noticed something new. A second message, just below the first one, faded, but still legible. If one falls, it must be returned. The hair on the back of my neck stood up, because I hadn't taken anything. I hadn't touched anything but that one cold bell. But something had. I turned and walked back, faster than before. Not running, not yet, but every step felt heavier, like I was dragging something unseen behind me. That night, the knocks came again. Same pattern. 3 quick taps, but this time they came from the front, near the door. Then silence. Then, an hour later, from the opposite side. Then again, from the rear. Always 3 knocks, never more, never less. I sat in bed, clutching the emergency flashlight like a weapon. My breath fogged the inside of the trailer. I could hear my own heartbeat louder than anything else. It wasn't until nearly dawn that I realized something else. The bells never rang, not once. Not even when the wind picked up around 4 a.m., stirring the trees so hard the RV swayed on its stabilizers. Somehow, that was worse, because I think they should have. I didn't leave the RV that morning, not because I was scared, at least that's what I told myself. I said I was tired, said I just wanted a rest day. Make breakfast, maybe read, maybe sit outside and listen to the quiet. But the truth was, the quiet wasn't peaceful anymore. It was expectant, like the woods were waiting for something, watching to see what I'd do next. I made eggs and coffee on the stovetop, kept the door closed, and stared out the small window over the sink. There was nothing there, just pine needles, gravel, sunlight through trees. But I still didn't step out. Around noon, I finally forced myself onto the fold-out chair I kept in the undercarriage. I sat with a book in my lap, unread, and my ears tuned to every creak of bark or rustle of leaves. And it wasn't just that I felt like something was out there. It was that I felt like something had noticed me. That evening, the woods got quiet again. Too quiet. Not the normal stillness you get before sunset, but a deeper, more complete silence, like sound itself had been drained from the air. No birds, no wind, even the bugs were gone. I stepped outside around dusk, wrapped in a hoodie, holding the flashlight like a lifeline. I wanted to walk. Not far, just to feel in control again, just far enough to remind myself that I wasn't afraid. I made it maybe 30 yards down the trail. Then I heard it. Not a knock. Not yet. This time it was a faint metallic sound like a bell. Just one. It rang once. Distant. Somewhere deep in the woods. It wasn't the wind. It wasn't some chime. It was the low, deliberate clang of a thick metal bell, echoing once and then falling silent. And it didn't come from the direction of the bell tree. It came from the other side. The part of the forest I hadn't even explored. I backed away without realizing it, stepping slowly back toward the RV. My breath was short and my skin felt tight, like my body was trying to shrink from the inside out. That night, the knocks started earlier. Still 3. Still spaced apart. But this time they circled the RV once every hour, moving clockwise. Front, side, rear, side. Front, like whatever it was measuring the walls, testing something. I didn't sleep. I just sat on the floor, flashlight pointed at the door, waiting for the sound to come again. And around 3 a.m., something changed. This time, there was a sound from the woods. A soft metallic jingle, just a few notes like wind brushing a few of the bells in passing. But there was no wind, not even a breeze, and I swear it was closer than before. When the sun came up, I made a decision. I had to go back to the tree. I don't know why. Maybe I thought it would stop whatever was happening. Maybe I thought if I could just see for myself that nothing else was missing, I could let this all go. I packed water, a knife, and a canister of bear spray, none of which made me feel safer, and started down the trail. The forest didn't look the same. I mean, the trees were the same, the path was the same, but everything felt leaning, not physically, but emotionally, like the forest had turned slightly toward me, listening, focusing, narrowing in its attention. When I reached the tree, I stopped short. There were 2 empty straps now, 2 bells gone. The rest of them hung limp, silent, unmoved. I don't know what I expected to feel, terror, maybe, or that tightening in my chest again. But I didn't. Not then. What I felt was guilt. Like I'd been warned and ignored it. Like the knocks weren't just some random haunting, but a message, a question, something asking, what will you do now? I wanted to leave then. I really did. I even started to turn around. But just before I stepped back onto the trail, I saw something tucked at the base of the trunk. It looked like cloth. I crouched down and pulled it free. It was a scrap of an old flannel shirt, torn, stiff, half buried in leaves. Inside it, carefully wrapped like it had been placed there deliberately, was a bell. Not rusted, not old, new. Still wrapped in leather, clean, heavy, and unmistakably similar to the others, except for one thing. On the inside of this bell, scratched by hand, were 3 letters, JKB. My stomach dropped. I didn't know what it meant. A name? Initials? But the fact that it was here, hidden at the base of the tree, told me someone else had tried to return one. And maybe they hadn't made it. That's when I heard the knock again, just once this time. But not on the RV, from behind me, in the forest, on a tree. 3 taps, quick, deliberate, close. I spun, heart thundering, and there was nothing. Just trees and distance. But the feeling was different now. It wasn't random. It was watching. And the guilt in my gut shifted into a cold realization. This thing, whatever it was, it wanted something returned. And if I didn't bring it back soon, it might come take more. I didn't run back. Not at first. That's the thing about fear when it goes deep enough. It doesn't make you sprint, it slows you down, makes your senses widen like floodlights, catching every branch, every shadow, every breath between trees. I walked, steady, focused. The bell still gripped in my left hand, the flannel cloth wrapped tight around it like I was cradling something sacred. I didn't hear the knock again on the way back, but I felt it in my spine, in the way the trees seemed to lean in just a little more with each step. By the time I reached the RV, my shirt was soaked through, not from exertion, but from the weight of it all. The knocking, the silence, the missing bells. And now this object in my hand that felt less like a bell and more like a key to something I hadn't meant to open. I locked the door behind me, pulled the blinds, double-checked the latches. Then I placed the bell on the dinette table and sat down across from it. It didn't look evil. It didn't feel cursed. But it was clean. Too clean. Not just compared to the rusted ones still hanging in that tree, but unnaturally so. Like it had never touched dirt or air. That night I didn't eat. I just sat near the window again, flashlight in my lap, watching, listening. At 10:42 p.m., the knocks came again, 3 of them, this time closer, not on the outer shell of the RV, on the steps. The thin aluminum steps that led to my door creaked with weight. Then, knock, knock, knock. I didn't move, didn't dare breathe. But I heard something else then, just under the knocks. Something that almost made my heart stop cold. Breathing. Not mine, not animal. It was slow, measured, like something standing just outside the door, exhaling softly against the thin screen. And then, the bell on the table rang, clear, 1 note. Not loud, but full, like it had been struck by an invisible hand. I turned toward it, flashlight beam wide and shaking. It sat perfectly still, unmoving. But I swear, the flannel had unwrapped itself. I didn't sleep that night. Didn't even blink, really. I sat in the corner with my back to the cabinet, flashlight aimed at the table, and waited for something, anything, to come through. But nothing did. And in some ways, that was worse, because now I had to choose. Leave the bell there, hope it ended, or return it. At dawn, I didn't hesitate. I dressed in silence, packed the bell in a towel, and headed out. The air was thicker now, not foggy, just dense, like the atmosphere had changed. The trail felt narrower, the turns less familiar. By the time I reached the bell tree again, the sun was high, but the light still struggled to reach the ground beneath those branches. I stood at the base and looked up. Still 2 straps swinging empty. Still no sound. Still no wind. I unwrapped the towel, held the bell in both hands, and slowly, gently, I reached up and tied it to one of the empty straps. The leather loop closed tight like it had never been missing. And then for the first time, one of the other bells moved. Just a twitch, a single sway. I backed away, step by step, not daring to turn around, and just as I reached the edge of the clearing, I heard it. Two bells ringing together. A brief harmony. Deep, hollow, not angry, not welcoming either. Just final, as if something had been answered or someone had been satisfied. I didn't go back to the RV right away. After I hung the bell, I sat just outside the clearing, just out of sight of the tree. I found a flat rock near the edge of the trail and let my legs dangle over the moss. I waited for something else to happen, a sound, a shape, a voice, anything, but nothing came. Just the forest, still, heavy. And for the first time in days, I felt something shift inside me. Not fear, not relief, but space. Like the air in my chest had cleared, like I could take a full breath again. But the peace didn't last, because sitting there, staring at the trail winding back toward camp, something else rose up in me, something quieter and colder than panic. A memory, something I hadn't thought about in years. Her name was Julia. We were 19. Summer kids working trails up in the Cascades. She was from Redding, had a smile that looked like mischief wrapped in sunlight. One weekend, we hiked out past the old fire roads, farther than we were supposed to. We found this clearing, wildflowers waist high, trees curling inward like a natural cathedral, and there, nailed to a branch, was a rusted bell. I don't know why, but she took it, said it was cute, said it looked lonely. I remember laughing. I remember not stopping her. 2 days later, she was gone. We searched for a week. The rangers found her boot near a dry creek bed, but not her. Not her pack, not even the bell. They said she probably got lost, maybe fell. But that didn't make sense. She was stronger than me out there, smarter too. And now, sitting near that tree with its endless rows of rusted bells swaying in invisible air, I thought of her face for the first time in years. Not smiling, not laughing, just still, waiting. Back at the RV, the silence followed me. But it was different now. No knocks, no breathing. No pressure against the walls, just silence, like something had released its grip, or paused. I made tea, ate a real meal, sat outside again, and I told myself I'd leave in the morning. But that night, the forest gave me something new, not a knock, not a bell, a voice. It came just after midnight, not a whisper, not a scream, just a single word spoken low and deliberate outside the RV. 1. I didn't move, didn't look. But my skin turned to ice. It wasn't the word itself. It was how it sounded, like it was being counted, like something had started keeping track. I slept in fits after that. My dreams were full of trees, narrow paths, and bells that rang underwater. When I woke, I was already standing, sweat freezing against my spine, breath catching in my throat. I packed. Fast. Efficient. I didn't eat, didn't wash, just hitched the RV and pulled out like the ground might open beneath me. The gravel cracked under the tires. The trees passed like a procession. But I never looked in the mirror, because part of me was afraid I'd see something walking behind the trailer, or worse, sitting inside. It took me 3 hours to reach cell service. When the first bar appeared on my phone, I pulled over, hands shaking, and searched. Rogue River bells. Nothing. Tree with bells in Oregon forest, a few photos, nothing like what I saw. Do not let the bells fall. No results, except one old forum post, buried, dated back in 2004. No username, just a story, someone describing a pine tree covered in bells, and a name. JKB. I stared at it for a long time. No explanation, no comments, just a final line. You can't take what was never yours, but it can take you. I should have kept driving. Should have powered through the exhaustion, the dread, the sick knot twisting in my stomach. But when I hit that small town just past Grants Pass, 6 hours from where I started, I couldn't do it anymore. There was a KOA just outside the city limits. Paved sites, security lights, families with bikes and camp chairs and citronella candles. Safe, or it looked that way. I backed into a gravel spot, hooked up power, and sat in the front seat for a long time. Engine still ticking. I kept thinking, this is over. This is over. It's done. I returned the bell. I made it out. But I couldn't shake that voice, that single word whispered outside the RV. 1. I replayed it in my head until it lost shape, until it sounded less like language and more like warning. I didn't sleep. Again. Around 2:30 a.m., I got up to use the bathroom at the far end of the campground. Motion lights flickered on as I walked. The smell of cut grass and propane and something else, something wet, metallic, followed me through the night air. I didn't think anything of it. Not until I came back and saw them. 3 small, perfect handprints, pressed into the condensation on the outside of my rear window, child-sized. Too small for mine. Too clean to be accidental. Just there, facing inward, like something had been watching me sleep. Except I hadn't been asleep. I backed away from the RV, heart thudding so hard I could hear it in my ears. I looked around the campground, empty, quiet. No sounds but a distant generator hum and the occasional bark of a dog 3 sites over. But the prints stayed. I got inside, locked everything, and stood in the dark, staring at those faint, damp outlines. I didn't sleep the rest of the night. The next morning, they were gone, wiped clean by sunrise. But the voice came again, this time just before dawn, as the sky began to tint orange behind the trees. It didn't speak from outside the RV. It spoke from the floor vent. Same voice. Same cadence, just a little closer. 2. That's when I knew I hadn't left anything behind. I hadn't escaped. I'd brought it with me. I sat down hard on the bench seat, feeling the weight of every mistake, taking the trail without asking, touching the bell, ignoring the signs, leaving with a new one in my hand. Even if I'd returned it, too much had already passed through me. Something had noticed. And now it was counting. 2 nights? 2 bells? 2 victims? I didn't know. But I started driving again, faster, avoided campgrounds, slept at truck stops, rest areas, gas stations lit up like stadiums. I told myself light would help, that the thing needed shadows, old places, silence. But it didn't matter. The voice came anyway, never louder, just closer. By the end of the week, I heard 3 from the space between my seat cushions, 4 from the storage bay below the bed, 5 as I stood in a public restroom stall at a Love's Travel stop in Idaho. No knock, no bell, just the count. Always one number higher. Each time the air changed, grew thinner, harder to swallow, like the voice was peeling layers off me. Then, one morning, I woke up before dawn and there was nothing, no knock, no voice, no whisper. I thought maybe it was over, that I'd been tested, watched, judged, and maybe I'd passed. Until I stepped outside and saw what someone or something had carved into the dirt behind my RV tires. Not words, just a line of numbers, etched deeply with something sharp. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. And below it, 7 comes in silence. I stared at those numbers in the dirt like they were alive, like at any moment they might rearrange themselves or reach up and grab me by the ankle. 6. And then 7 comes in silence. I whispered it out loud, just once. The wind didn't answer, the trees didn't move, but the moment the words left my lips, I felt it. A stillness behind me, like someone standing inches away, not breathing. I turned, fast, nothing, just the familiar shell of my RV, the empty gravel pad, a half-eaten protein bar on the picnic table, but I knew better now. Whatever was happening, it wasn't waiting anymore. It was closing in. I hit the road again, didn't even check my tires, didn't care. I didn't have a map anymore. Just drive. Just put distance between me and the place that started all this. But Rogue River wasn't behind me anymore. It was inside. That night, I pulled into a field somewhere east of Twin Falls. No campgrounds, no people, no lights. Just me and the stars and a wind that whispered through broken stalks of grass. I thought maybe if I stopped running, it would stop following. But it didn't. At 3:12 a.m., I woke to the sound of something sliding across the floor. A dragging noise, soft, measured. I sat up, too afraid to call out, too aware that I wasn't supposed to see it yet. Then came the voice. Lower now, inside. 6. No knock, no sound but my own heartbeat pounding in my ears like war drums. I stayed awake until dawn, curled in the corner near the fridge, flashlight on, knife in hand, sweating through every layer I wore. And as the sun broke the sky, I noticed something carved into the condensation on the inside of the window. A tree. Just the rough outline. But hanging from every branch were tiny, perfect bells. I drove. Again. Longer this time. Hours that blurred into light and shadow. The world kept moving around me. Radio signals, gas prices, road signs with names I didn't recognize. But I wasn't part of it anymore. I was just passing through. And then 2 days later, I stopped again. Not because I needed rest, but because something changed. I didn't hear a voice, didn't see a number, didn't feel the presence. It was the absence that got me. No tension, no dread, no pressure in the air. For the first time in over a week, nothing. I sat on a picnic table outside a rest stop near Bozeman, watching traffic, watching clouds, feeling more human than I had in days. I almost convinced myself it was over, that maybe the count had been some twisted echo, a way for the forest to purge me, and now I was clean. But that night, just after I climbed into bed, something woke me. Not a sound, not a dream, just a feeling like something inside the RV had changed shape. I turned on the light. Everything looked the same, except for one thing. On the counter near the sink sat a bell. Not one of the old rusted ones, a new one, polished, gleaming. And this time it wasn't alone. It was tied with twine to a pine branch. A fresh one, still sappy, still green, still dripping. I didn't touch it, didn't go near it. I just sat in the driver's seat, engine off, keys in my lap, and stared at it like it might explode. It hadn't been there when I went to sleep. I would have seen it. I should have seen it. But now it was the only thing in the RV that looked real, like everything else was fading. And that's when I realized the count wasn't about me. It was about it, how close it was getting, how many steps remained before it arrived, before it stepped fully from the shadows into my world, before it made its claim. 7 wasn't just a number. It was a threshold. I didn't move for an hour. The bell stayed there, gleaming like it had been waiting, like it had always been there and I'd only just become capable of seeing it. It wasn't tied with leather like the others, just rough pine twine, knotted tight, still sticky with resin. And the branch, it was so fresh, too fresh, like it had just been clipped from the same forest I'd left behind over a week ago. I didn't need to ask how it got here. It didn't matter. What mattered was that it wasn't mine. None of them had ever been mine. I stepped out of the RV and breathed hard, trying to push air into lungs that felt like they were shrinking. I could still smell it. Sap, pine, rust, the same combination that had clung to my clothes after the first time I found that tree. It was following me in pieces now, not just through sound or voice, but through object, through memory, through choice. Somewhere along the way, I'd been marked, or maybe I'd volunteered. I knew I couldn't keep running. I knew if I hit 7, it wouldn't matter how far I went. So I did the one thing I hadn't tried. I turned back. I rerouted west, toward Oregon, toward Rogue River, toward the Bell Tree. I wasn't trying to undo anything anymore. I'd given up on that illusion. I just wanted to face it, whatever it was, whatever I had become to it. I didn't sleep on the way, didn't eat, just drove in long, silent stretches with the bell still sitting on my dashboard, unmoving. It didn't ring, it didn't fall, but I swear I felt it vibrating sometimes, like it was counting too, and it was waiting for me to decide whether I'd end the count or be claimed by it. I reached the forest late in the afternoon. The air looked the same, but it felt different now, heavier. Not because of what was there, because of what was watching. I didn't even park the RV, just cut the engine and walked straight into the trees with the bell in my hand. The trail remembered me. It was easier to find than before. But that wasn't comfort. That was design. It wanted me to come back. And this time, when I reached the clearing, I didn't hesitate. The tree was waiting. More bells now, many more. Some still rusted, but others were new, polished, clean, hanging low. I stepped beneath the canopy and held mine out like an offering, and for the first time I heard the forest breathe, not through wind, not through branches, through me. I tied the bell gently to an empty branch, and just as I let go, the entire tree shuddered. Not visibly, not physically, but internally, like it had consumed something, accepted a piece of me. And somewhere in the forest, somewhere behind me, a voice whispered, not aloud but inside my skull, 6. I shook, because it wasn't finishing the count. It was resetting it, starting again, a new tally, a new link, a new person on the list. And that's when I understood. Returning the bell hadn't freed me. It had bound me. I wasn't a visitor anymore. I was part of it. I stood beneath the branches, the bell swaying gently behind me, and waited for something to change. But nothing did. The forest didn't shift. The air didn't snap. There was no flash of understanding, no ghost stepping from the trees, just silence. Thick, immovable silence. And that's when I realized the change wasn't out there. It was in me. I was no longer a traveler, no longer lost. I had become part of the forest's inventory. And that meant I had a role now. I didn't speak, but I heard my own thoughts like someone else had written them. 7 comes in silence. I turned back toward the trail, and for the first time, I noticed something I hadn't seen before. Smaller trees lining the path, young, but every one of them had a single bell, fresh, unrusted. Their branches low enough for anyone to reach, and all of them perfectly still, like they were waiting too. I followed the trail back, heart slow now, too steady for comfort. By the time I reached the edge of the gravel road, the sun had begun to fall behind the ridge. The air turned copper and lavender, and for the first time since all this began, I heard something behind me that wasn't a knock. It was a voice, a child's voice. It said one word, please. I didn't turn around, because I knew who it was. Julia. She was the first, or maybe not, but she was my first. The bell she took, the way she vanished. All these years, I thought she'd been lost, that the forest had swallowed her like an accident. But I saw it clearly now. She'd been counted. She'd been collected. And maybe, just maybe, she had become part of the tree too. Maybe every bell was a person, or a promise, or a mistake. And now I had one hanging too, my bell. Fresh, unweathered, waiting for someone else to touch it, to take it, to start their own count. That night, I didn't sleep. I sat outside the RV with the engine off, the stars overhead, and the silence growing inside me like a second heart. And when the knock came, just 1, not 3, I didn't flinch, because I knew it wasn't a warning anymore. It was a greeting, a beginning. The forest wasn't done with me. It had recruited me to remember, to witness, to keep the bells from falling. And so now I wait. I park the RV in small towns, quiet forests, the edge of state parks. I don't go looking for people, but sometimes they find me. They ask about places to camp, about old trails, about where they can go to be alone. And I point them toward Rogue River. Because I'm not running anymore. I'm listening, I'm counting. And when the time comes, when the right person steps into the trees and sees the bells for the first time, I'll be there. To hear the first knock, to hear the first ring, and to whisper the first word. 1. I've worked as a wildlife ranger in the Mojave for 8 years. I've seen heat stroke, dehydration, hallucinations. I've helped carry out the dead, watched people crumble in the sand like they were never really there to begin with. The desert is not kind to the unprepared, and it's even less kind to those who think they understand it. But what happened in the spring of last year, what happened to me, I haven't been able to talk about until now. Not because I was scared of sounding crazy, though God knows I've spent enough nights wondering if I am. It's because I still don't know what part of it was real, what part of it belonged to me. I was stationed at a small outpost near the northwestern edge of the Mojave National Preserve, close to where the Joshua trees give way to red sand and the roads start to vanish into nothing. We'd received a report of 2 missing hikers, college kids, both men, early 20s. They'd entered the preserve 2 days before and hadn't checked in. No call, no signal, just gone. That's not unusual out here. You'd be surprised how many people think GPS will work in the middle of a dry basin with no towers for 40 miles. But something about this one felt off. They were last seen near an old ranger road called Bauman's Cut, which hadn't been maintained in years. It's not even on public maps anymore. No campgrounds, no signage. It was officially shut down after a landslide eroded part of the trail, but I knew the way. I volunteered to check it out myself. I had a sat phone, 2 gallons of water, emergency markers, and my sidearm. I didn't think I'd need any of it. The sun was high, the wind still, the kind of day that bakes the thoughts right out of your head if you're not careful. I started out from the old service gate around 11 a.m. My boots sank just enough in the sand to remind me how far I was from anything solid. The Joshua trees stood twisted and still, their shadows long and thin against the earth, like they were leaning away from something I couldn't see. After about 3 miles, the trail narrowed and dropped down into a shallow arroyo. I found the first sign of the hikers there, a crumpled plastic wrapper, half buried under the red dust. I marked the spot and pressed on. That's when I realized my compass was off. At first, I thought I'd just read it wrong, but no matter how many times I turned, the needle stayed fixed, like it was stuck pointing north-northeast, even when I rotated in full circles. I tapped it, shook it. Nothing. I carry a backup analog compass. Same result. That should have been enough for me to head back. But the heat does something to you. It makes your decisions stick to the sweat in your skin. You don't always think straight, but you think hard, so I kept going. Not 200 yards later, I saw something strange. My shadow, cast perfectly sharp in the sun behind me, froze. I mean, it stopped moving when I did, like a pause button had been hit. I took 3 steps forward. The shadow stayed behind. Then, like a skipped frame in an old VHS tape, it jumped to catch up. I stood completely still, breathed slow, raised my hand. The shadow didn't move, not even a twitch. The silence was so loud I could hear my own heartbeat in my ears. Then slowly the shadow lifted its hand, just 1 second too late. I don't know how long I stood there staring at it. Eventually I moved again. I turned in circles, crouched, raised both arms like an idiot. The shadow would lag behind, then snap into position, always a second behind me. My skin went cold, and not just with fear, like the temperature had actually dropped, just around me. The hairs on my neck stood up. I pulled out the sat phone. No signal. I reached for the radio. Static. I should have headed back. I should have run. But the strange thing is, I didn't feel like I could. It wasn't panic. It was more like inertia, like I wasn't deciding anything anymore, like I was already following a path I didn't choose. About an hour later, I found the remains of a camp. 2 sleeping bags, a half-burned fire pit, 1 aluminum pot overturned in the dirt, a crumpled journal. The pages were torn, but one stood out. The writing was erratic. No shadow for him. Keeps saying he feels split. Keeps walking ahead and coming back without realizing. Says the sky doesn't look real. I didn't find any bodies. But I did find blood, drops leading away from the camp toward a narrow stone ravine, the kind that cuts deep and sudden when the land forgets how to hold itself up. I followed it. At the base of the ravine, I found something I still can't explain. There was a rock shelf, like a small overhang, and just beneath it, etched into the stone, were dozens of handprints. They weren't painted. They weren't carved. They were baked into the surface, like whatever made them had burned straight through flesh into rock. Some were small, child-sized. Others looked warped, stretched like they'd been pulled down too fast. I turned around to leave. That's when I saw it. At the top of the ravine, not 15 feet above me. My shadow. But I hadn't cast it. The sun was behind me. There was no possible way it should have been there. And worse, it wasn't alone. Another shadow stood beside it, taller, narrower. The limbs were too long, the head bent slightly, like it was listening. I didn't look up, I didn't want to see what was standing above me. I just started climbing. Hands scraped on hot stone, boots slipping. My radio crackled once, just once, and then went dead again. By the time I got to the top, nothing was there. No prints, no sound. But my own shadow was facing me. It shouldn't have been. I turned slowly. No matter where I moved, it stayed in front of me, like I was backlit by a sun that didn't exist, and then it turned on its own and walked behind a boulder. I stayed frozen. The air was wrong, thick, heavy. I stepped forward and looked behind the rock. Nothing. But when I turned again, I saw it standing 30 yards away. Not the shadow. Me. Myself. Standing motionless facing me across the sand. The figure didn't speak, didn't move. But I felt something, like a shift inside my own mind, like a door opening where no door had ever been. I blinked. and it was gone. The heat came rushing back like someone flipped a switch. Sweat returned, my breath caught, and when I looked down, my shadow was finally back to normal, or so I thought. That's when I checked the time. My watch said 1:18 p.m., but my phone, now working again, read 6:42 p.m. I'd lost over 5 hours. I don't remember walking back. I don't remember the drive. I woke up in my bunk the next morning with my boots still on and dried blood under my fingernails. They never found the hikers, and when I tried to revisit the area, Bauman's Cut was gone. Gone. Not blocked, not washed out. It just wasn't there, like the trail had never existed. And here's the worst part. Every once in a while around dusk, I see something out of the corner of my eye, a flicker, a movement behind me. But when I turn around, my shadow doesn't follow. It watches and waits. I didn't tell anyone the full story, not at first. I filed my report, kept it dry and official. Trail impassable, no sign of missing persons, return advised. I knew the protocol. Keep it tight, keep it useful. The rest, it wouldn't have helped anyone. But over the next week, little things kept unraveling. It started with the clocks. My wristwatch ran 5 hours slow, permanently. No matter how many times I reset it, synced it with GPS, or replaced the battery, it kept drifting back to that gap, always 5 hours behind. The station wall clock started ticking irregularly whenever I walked into the radio room. Tick, tick, tick. Pause, tick. I could hear it in my sleep. Then came the boots. I left them on the porch one night, dust-caked, sun-hardened, the way you do after a long week. In the morning, they were flipped. Left was right. Right was left. Not just moved, perfectly inverted. That's when I started noticing the other thing. My shadow was never where it should be. I'd catch it a half second behind again. Not always, but enough. Enough to know it wasn't a trick of the light. Sometimes it stretched too long, even when the sun was overhead. Sometimes I'd turn to check it and it would hesitate, like it didn't want to be caught. I tried to rationalize. Heat stroke, stress, PTSD. I even had a therapist friend send me some basic screening tools, but nothing explained why my boots kept flipping. Why I'd find handprints on the underside of my bunk, like someone had been holding themselves up from underneath. Or why, one night, I woke up outside, barefoot, with no tracks between my door and where I stood 200 yards from the station in the middle of the gravel lot. Just mine, standing still, like I'd been placed there. 2 weeks passed. The case on the hikers went cold. The trail remained missing. No trace on GPS, no satellite records, nothing. That's when the call came in. Another disappearance. But this one wasn't hikers. It was a fire crew. 3 men. On assignment checking fuel breaks near the southern basin. All trained, all experienced. Their radio transmissions had gone erratic just before contact was lost. And here's what chilled me. The last transmission from one of them, a guy named Myers, was this. "You're not walking right. You're not walking like you. Why is your shadow wrong?" Dispatch wrote it off as garbled static, but I heard it and I knew. It wasn't just me. Whatever it was, whatever still is, it was moving, spreading, and I couldn't stay quiet anymore. I drove out to the basin under cover of night. I wasn't supposed to. No orders, no partner. But I needed to know if what happened to me was happening again. The sky was starless, choked with low clouds and heat haze. I cut the engine 3 miles out and walked the rest. Every step felt heavier. The sand was soft, like walking on coals that hadn't gone out. And then I felt it, a vibration underfoot, faint, rhythmic, like a pulsing drum buried far below the surface. I thought at first it was a quake, but then I realized it was timed to my heartbeat, every beat a thump under the ground, as if the earth was mirroring me, or learning from me. I found the fire crew's ATV half sunk in a shallow pit, engine cold, no signs of a struggle, but nearby, etched into the dry wash floor, were boot prints, perfect prints, in a straight line. Only they didn't match the crew's gear issue. They matched mine. That's when I heard the clicking. Soft, sharp, like 2 stones tapping against each other. Click, click, click. It wasn't close, but it wasn't far enough either. I swung my light, panning the dark. Joshua trees twisted like frozen dancers. Nothing moved. until I saw the shadow again. It wasn't cast. It wasn't tethered. It stood on its own, just outside the radius of my beam, and it mimicked every step I made, a second too late. I took a breath and held it. The clicking stopped. I backed away. The shadow stood still. Then it tilted its head, slow, like it was curious. That was worse than if it had attacked me, because I understood something in that moment. It wasn't trying to be me. It was learning how I worked, like a child watching a teacher, or a predator watching prey long enough to mimic it. I ran. I don't remember the full sprint back, only pieces. My hand bleeding from something I must have tripped over. The sound of footsteps that didn't match mine. The feeling that I was being paced by something not quite solid, but heavier than air. When I reached my truck, it was locked. I never lock it. The keys were in the ignition. Engine running. Headlights facing away from where I'd parked it, as if I'd planned to drive straight into the dark. I left the Mojave 3 days later, requested reassignment, took sick leave, anything I could do to get out, but it hasn't left me. The clicks, the delays in movement, the feeling that something's watching from the edges of mirrors and glass and dark hallways. 3 weeks ago, I got a letter. No return address, no name, just a crumpled envelope with a single line inside, "Your shadow doesn't forget." And now, each morning when I wake, I don't check my phone first. I don't reach for coffee. I check the wall to see if the light through the window casts my shape right, to see if it still moves with me, because someday I know it won't. And when that happens, when it stops again, I don't think it'll wait behind me. I think it'll walk ahead. And this time, I'll be the one trying to catch up. I tried to rebuild my life after I left the Mojave. Took a seasonal position up in Montana near the Absaroka Range. Cooler air, denser woods. Figured if there were shadows up there, at least I wouldn't see them stretching out 30 feet behind me. But even trees have gaps. Even snow has reflection. And the thing about this presence, is that it's not bound to one place. It's tied to perception, to what you notice. And once you've noticed it, it doesn't need to stay hidden anymore. The first week in Montana was quiet. My new crew didn't ask questions. I kept to myself, mostly doing animal tracking surveys and perimeter checks. Nights were calm, cold enough to hurt, but real in that way the desert never was. But on the 7th night, I woke to a scraping noise, not outside. Under the floorboards. It was subtle, wood flexing slightly, like pressure being applied from underneath. Something pressing up from the crawl space. I froze in bed, breath shallow. Then I saw it, on the far wall, in the glow of the moonlight coming through the window. My shadow. But my body wasn't aligned with it. I was lying on my side. The shadow was sitting up. I closed my eyes, just shut them tight. When I opened them again, it was gone. But the scrape under the floor, that was still there. I tried to explain it to a coworker the next day. He was polite, listened, even cracked a joke about raccoons. Then he asked, "What do you mean your shadow sat up?" I hadn't told him that part. I hadn't said a word about the shadow moving differently. He backed off when I asked him to explain, acted like he was just making assumptions, but I could see it in his eyes, the flash of discomfort, like he knew something, like maybe it had visited him too. Weeks passed. Things got worse. Time slips returned. I'd wake up and find a boot missing. An hour gone. I started seeing mirrored versions of myself, reflections in dark windows that moved when I didn't, standing a little too straight, tilting the head at odd angles. Once in the reflection of a pond during a morning hike, I watched myself reach into my own jacket. I wasn't moving, but my reflection unzipped my coat and pulled something out, something long, something sharp. I threw a rock into the water just to make it stop. I began documenting everything, not for others, just for myself, trying to track if this was in my head or real, trying to find patterns. The only one I could see was light. Whenever light was indirect, moonlight, reflections, firelight, that's when it moved freely. But in pure light, direct light, it stuttered, sometimes froze. I started keeping a tactical flashlight on me at all times, not because I thought it would keep me safe, but because I needed a delay. I needed warning, and I needed to know when it was close. 2 nights ago, I had what I guess you'd call a final warning. It was 2:13 a.m. I'd fallen asleep in the ranger tower, a storm rolling in over the tree line. The wind was loud, real loud. I could hear the trees straining. But there was something under the wind. Click, click, pause, click. It wasn't outside. It wasn't in the building. It was inside my head, like something was tapping the inside of my skull. I stood up, looked around, no one there, but my shadow was on the ceiling, not cast, not flipped, just wrong. It crawled slowly from one beam to the next, perfectly silent, no movement on the ground. It reached the corner above me, and I swear to you, it looked down. That's the last thing I remember. I woke up in the forest, no boots, no flashlight, just a line of my own footprints in the snow leading to me. None leading away. I'm not trying to convince anyone anymore. You can think this is some psychotic break, trauma-induced hallucination, sleep paralysis mixed with bad desert air. Maybe it is. But that doesn't explain the security camera footage I found last week. I'd set up a cheap trail cam outside my cabin, motion activated. 4 nights ago, it caught movement, just a flicker, just enough. Frame by frame, I watched myself walk out of the cabin at 3:17 a.m., only I never did. I was asleep the whole night. Still, in the footage, I opened the door, stood still for 30 seconds, and then I turned around, and there was nothing behind me. No light source, no moon, but the ground cast a shadow anyway. A shadow of a man standing too tall, his arms too long, fingers stretched to a point. And the final frame, that shadow moved forward. But I didn't. It passed through me like smoke, like it was reclaiming something, or reminding me of something I'd forgotten. So that's where I am now, waiting, watching my movements in every mirror, counting seconds between steps, marking how often my reflection delays, and hoping that whatever I brought back from Bauman's cut never finds its full form. Because I have a theory, a terrible one, that out in the Mojave, near those etched handprints, something wasn't mimicking us. It was extracting us, replacing pieces, bit by bit, until the only thing left that's real is the part that's already gone. I don't remember what first woke me up that morning. Maybe it was the silence, maybe the light, but it wasn't the kind of light you expect at 6 a.m. in a campground tucked along the Timberline Highway near Mount Hood. This light was overexposed, thin, white, too even. The kind of brightness that washes color from the world and leaves everything look like an old photograph left in the sun. I sat up in the bed of our little 1999 Gulfstream Conquest, blinking at the strange, almost clinical glow that poured in through the window shades. My girlfriend, Cassidy, was still curled under the blankets beside me, one foot sticking out like it always did, breathing soft and even. I checked my watch, 10:43 a.m. We'd meant to get up early and hike the ridge above the lake, try to beat the crowds, but I felt off, like I'd overslept by more than just a couple of hours, like I'd been drugged, groggy, dry-mouthed, detached from my body. You know when you wake up from a nap and don't know what day it is? Multiply that by 10 and code it in anxiety. I slid out of bed and pulled the blinds open, and that's when I noticed it. The sun was sitting high above the trees, as if it were noon already, yet it didn't feel like noon. No warmth, no wind. The trees weren't swaying, not even slightly. I couldn't hear birds or insects, just the faint hum of silence pressing against the glass. Outside, the light seemed almost sterile, like it didn't come from a sun at all, but from a massive LED panel suspended somewhere above the clouds. I stepped outside barefoot, blinking at the sky. The forest surrounding our site stretched wide, endless pines and a few fire-scarred trunks from seasons past. There were a few other RVs tucked into the forest down the road, but no one was outside. No smoke from campfires, no laughter, no children on bikes, just that eerie frozen daylight and the smell of stale bark and dust. I didn't realize I was holding my breath until I heard Cassidy's voice behind me. "Hey, what time is it?" I turned and found her in the doorway, rubbing her eyes. Almost 11, I said. You feel weird? She nodded, squinting into the sky. Feels like I slept for 100 years. We made coffee, tried to shake off the heaviness, and planned a short hike instead of the full loop. I tried to push down the unease. Maybe it was altitude or maybe the change in our sleep schedule. It was our third night camping, and we were usually better adjusted by now, but still, something felt wrong. And not just in my body. It was the trees, the silence, the way our shadows fell just a little too long for the hour. I didn't even notice that until we were halfway up the trail, Cassidy walking ahead, her blonde ponytail swinging. I glanced at the ground and saw her shadow trailing behind her at an angle that didn't match the position of the sun. My own shadow seemed to stretch forward, then sideways, almost like it wanted to slip out of sync with me. I didn't say anything at first. I just kept walking. We reached a small overlook around 1. At least that's what our watches told us. The valley below was still soaked in that unnatural daylight, the lake flat and glassy, too still for midday. Cassidy sat on a fallen log and opened a protein bar. I stood behind her, watching the horizon, trying to find some sense of direction in the mountains, some clue that the sun was moving like it should. It wasn't. I know that sounds crazy, the kind of thing your brain tells you when you've been camping too long and your body misses Wi-Fi and air conditioning. But I checked the shadows again, marked a branch where the sun hit it, set a timer. 20 minutes later, the shadow hadn't moved. Neither had the light. Neither had the wind. Cass, I said, turning to her slowly, how long have we been up here? She looked at her phone. No signal, of course, but the time still read 1:17. Not long. I took her hand and pointed to the ground. That shadow hasn't moved. The sun's not moving. She stared at the spot I showed her, looked up, then back at me. Doesn't make sense. No, it doesn't. She laughed nervously, the kind of laugh you use when you're trying to keep it together. Maybe we're just misreading it. Maybe it's just a weird spot. Let's hike down, eat something. We'll feel better. We tried to laugh it off. I wish I could say I believed her. But something deep in my chest had already shifted. The kind of shift you feel when you realize you've passed the trail marker going in, and now nothing looks familiar. We hiked back to the RV, but it didn't feel like descending. The light didn't soften. The temperature didn't change. The same birds didn't sing. The trail felt looped, like we were retracing a memory instead of walking a real path. And then we saw the same white rock on the side of the trail, same scratch marks, same pine branch dangling overhead. We stopped, looked at each other. We've already passed this, Cassidy whispered. I know. She pulled out her phone, took a photo of the rock. Let's keep going, I said. Just don't stop. We moved faster this time. 30 more minutes of hiking, silent and focused. And then the same rock again. Cassidy froze. No. I looked at the photo, same cracks, same patch of moss. We're not moving, she said. We're walking, but we're not moving. I looked back up at the sky, still that cold, unmoving daylight, no clouds, no change. We ran. Back down the trail, hearts pounding, legs burning. We didn't speak, we didn't stop. Somehow, we made it back to the campground. I don't know how. The RV was still there in the same spot we'd left it, but every other campsite was empty. Every single one. Cassidy stood beside me, panting, sweat dripping from her temple despite the coolness in the air. I reached for the RV door handle like it was a lifeline, not entirely sure what getting inside would solve, only that I needed something between us and whatever was outside. The lock clicked open. We both climbed in fast, shut the door, and pulled the curtains tight. I half expected someone or something to be watching us through the trees. But when I peeked through the small slit in the curtain, there was no movement, no people, just the bright, sterile daylight bleaching the dirt and gravel outside, casting those long, warped shadows that refused to align with their sources. Cassidy collapsed onto the bench seat and clutched her knees to her chest. "Where is everyone?" she asked, voice thin. I didn't answer. I was too busy trying to remember the last time we'd seen another human being. A family had been barbecuing a few sites down the first night. We'd heard music playing, smelled hot dogs cooking, but I hadn't seen them today. I hadn't seen anyone. No rangers, no hikers, just us and the sun that wouldn't move. I grabbed my phone, checked the time again, 2:42 p.m., the exact same time it had been 15 minutes earlier. I opened the clock app, watched the minute hand. It didn't budge, not a tick. The battery was fine. The phone was warm in my hand, but time had stopped. "Cass," I said quietly, "your watch. What time is it?" She looked down. "Still 1:58. It hasn't changed since the overlook." She held it up like it was broken, then tried tapping the glass. "You think this is all some kind of solar flare?" she asked, desperate for an explanation. "Or maybe we got hit with some kind of radiation." "I don't know," I whispered, "but I don't think it's global." "What do you mean?" I hesitated. The thought had been circling in my head since the trail. I think it's just here, just us." "No," she said, standing up. No, that's not possible. Time doesn't stop. The sun doesn't stay still." "I know, but it's happening." She started pacing. I heard her breath start to pick up again, shallow, rapid, panic. I stood up and gently took her by the shoulders. "We're okay. We're together. We just need to think." Cassidy pulled away and went to the small sink, ran the faucet. Water gushed out fine. She filled a glass and drank it down fast. Then she stared at the window again. "Why can't I feel the sun?" I looked too. She was right. The light was blinding, but it didn't give off warmth. My skin hadn't tingled all day. It was like standing in a photograph of summer, not summer itself. "Okay," I said, trying to steady my thoughts. "We need to drive out. Whatever this is, maybe it's localized. A few miles away, it could be fine." Cassidy nodded. "Let's go." We didn't even change clothes. I slid into the driver's seat, cranked the ignition. The Gulf Stream roared to life, a sound so normal and alive that it almost made me believe we were safe again. Almost. I shifted into drive and rolled forward down the gravel path. Dust curled behind us in the side mirror, soft and gray, and still no other campers in sight. Not even tire tracks. We reached the fork where the main road met the entry road. I turned onto the highway, expecting the familiar comfort of smooth asphalt and directional signs, but the road didn't look familiar. It should have sloped down gently toward the ranger station, but instead it just ran straight, flat, unending. No elevation change, no signs, just trees evenly spaced marching beside us like sentinels. After 10 minutes, I checked the GPS. The screen glitched for a second, then froze. The little blue arrow showing our position just spun in place. We kept driving. Cassidy stared ahead, hands clenched in her lap. "How far have we gone?" "About 5 miles, I think." I lied. I didn't want to tell her that it felt like the road hadn't shifted at all. The scenery outside looked identical to the last curve. The same bent pine trunk, the same ditch. I started watching for irregularities, any landmark, any unique feature to prove we were making progress. Nothing. "I don't think we're moving," she said softly. "We are," I replied, forcing the words out. "The speedometer's working. We're at 35. But even as I said it, the digits started to flicker. Cassidy turned slowly, her face pale. "Why aren't we leaving?" I didn't know. The gas gauge ticked down. Not fast, but enough to make my chest tighten. We couldn't keep driving forever, and still no signs, no cell service, no people, no end to the road. After 20 more minutes, I pulled over. "We need to think this through." Cassidy didn't move, just stared out the window like something might appear in the trees if she waited long enough. "Maybe," she said at last, "maybe this isn't about getting out." "What do you mean?" "Maybe we're not meant to leave until we understand what's happening." "Cass, that sounds like a story," she said. "Like a dream?" "I know, but so does everything else." I didn't have a response. We sat in silence, the engine ticking softly as it cooled, the fake daylight pressing in through the windshield. Then she turned to me with a quiet voice. "Do you remember that story you told me once about being lost in the woods when you were a kid?" I nodded, confused. "Yeah. Why? Didn't you say the thing that got you out was stopping?" I blinked. "Yeah, I sat still and the trail appeared again." Cassidy leaned forward. Maybe we're running in circles because we're trying to escape. But what if this place isn't letting us go until we stop? The idea was so absurd, it felt dangerous to even entertain it. But something about it rang true. I turned off the engine. The quiet was immediate, still, hollow. The air inside the RV seemed to grow heavier. Cassidy closed her eyes, and for the first time all day, we sat still. We didn't talk, we didn't look at our phones, we just waited. And then 30 minutes later, the first real change happened. The shadows outside shifted. It was subtle at first. A movement in the corner of my eye, like the flick of a curtain when no window is open. Cassidy saw it too. We both turned toward the windshield at the same time, our bodies tensing, eyes wide. The shadows had shifted, not drastically, but enough that the tips of the trees now stretched in a slightly different direction. A minute ago, they'd leaned east. Now, southeast. Cassidy whispered, "It moved." Neither of us said anything for a while. My heart thudded in my chest, not just because something had changed, but because something had responded. We hadn't forced anything. We hadn't run or screamed or pushed our way out. We'd stopped, and the world had moved. "What does it mean?" she asked. I didn't have a theory. Just a feeling, like we were caught in something intelligent, watching us, mirroring us, something that wasn't evil, necessarily, but ancient, cold, patient, and very, very aware. Outside, the light was still white and sterile, but now the edges of the forest had softened. The contrast was dulling, like the sharpness of a fever breaking. Still no warmth, no sound, but something in the texture of the world was giving just slightly. Cassidy reached for my hand and squeezed. "We have to keep doing it." Doing what? Not running, not fighting it, just being still. We waited again, this time for an hour, then 2. We didn't talk much, just listened to the silence and watched that frozen sun hanging high in the sky like a coin stuck on glass. I know how crazy it sounds to believe that our stillness somehow mattered, but in that moment you start to believe anything that gives you a thread of meaning. Your brain doesn't crave truth, it craves logic. A system, cause and effect, and that tiny shift in the shadows felt like something we could control. At 4, according to my frozen watch, Cassidy stood up and said, "Let's go outside." I wanted to tell her no, that we didn't know what was out there, that the light might be a trap, but I couldn't deny what I'd seen. Something had changed. And if we stayed frozen forever, maybe we'd just disappear in that light, like snow melting without a trace. We stepped outside together. It was the same campground, but it felt emptier somehow, like the space between things had grown. The trees seemed farther apart. The clouds, there were clouds, tiny, wispy ones, barely visible, but they hadn't been there before. I tilted my head, trying to follow them with my eyes, but they didn't move. Still, their presence meant something. Even static, they were new, and new meant time, or at least the suggestion of it. "We should try walking," Cassidy said softly. "Where?" She looked around, then pointed toward the woods behind our campsite. "Somewhere we haven't been, somewhere we didn't try to escape through." We didn't pack anything, just stepped over the dry brush and started walking between the trees. The woods felt less like a forest now and more like a memory of one. Familiar but flat. The trees were spaced too evenly, the underbrush too tidy, the air too quiet, as if the environment had been reconstructed from someone's incomplete recollection of nature. Like a diorama, a simulation. Cassidy walked ahead of me, slow and steady, her arms slightly out to her sides like she was trying to feel the air. After 20 minutes, we came to a small clearing. Dead center stood a stump, freshly cut, too fresh. No moss, no fungus. The bark was smooth, like it had never weathered a season. Cassidy crouched beside it, tracing the rings with her finger. "This doesn't belong here." I circled the clearing, trying to find a trail, a marker, anything to orient us, but there was nothing. No animals, no sounds, not even a breeze. Then I noticed the trees around the clearing didn't cast shadows anymore, not even the distorted ones. I turned to Cassidy. "We should go back." She nodded slowly, but her eyes were unfocused, distant. She touched her temple like she had a headache. We retraced our steps, or tried to. But after 15 minutes, the stump appeared again. We both stopped dead in our tracks. No, Cassidy whispered. I walked faster. 10 more minutes. Left turn. Then right. Still the stump. Cass, I said, voice shaking. We're stuck in a loop again. But this one felt different. It didn't feel physical. It felt constructed, like we were being redirected. Not by terrain, but by something bigger. Some intelligence. I stepped up to the stump and slammed my palm against it. It was warm. Not from sunlight. There was none. Not from friction. It radiated heat, low and constant, like something alive. Cassidy knelt and pressed her ear against the cut surface, then jerked back. I heard something, she said. Inside. What? She stared at me, pale. A ticking. I crouched beside her, held my ear to the stump. Nothing at first, then faint. Tick, tick, tick. I pulled away, heart racing. The sound was low, deliberate, not mechanical, organic even, like a pulse pretending to be a clock. We didn't speak, just stood slowly and backed away from the clearing. The second we stepped beyond the edge, the shadows returned. We ran, back through the trees, breath ragged, not caring about direction. Just away from the stump, away from whatever had built that fake forest, that ticking. We burst out near the edge of the campground again. Somehow, impossibly, we'd made a full loop back to our site. And that's when we saw them. People. 3 of them. A couple and a child. Walking down the road with a cooler in hand. Laughing, chatting, like nothing had happened. Cassidy grabbed my arm. Are they real? We watched them for a moment. They didn't flicker, didn't glitch. The kid kicked a pine cone. The father called something to the wife. I ran toward them, calling out, "Hey!" The man turned and smiled. "Hey there!" Cassidy caught up beside me, breathless. "Where did you come from?" "Site 27, he said. "Just got in an hour ago." Site 27 was 2 lots down from ours, empty all day. "I thought you weren't here," I stammered. He frowned. "No, we've been here a while. You folks okay?" Cassidy and I exchanged a glance. And that's when we realized the light was normal again, warm, gentle. The sun was lower, and the clock on my phone was moving. We stood there for a moment, blinking in the new warmth. The man and his family continued toward their campsite, chatting casually, rolling their cooler across the gravel like nothing had ever been wrong. Cassidy was still holding my arm, frozen, staring at the sun as if it might vanish again. But it didn't. It dipped slowly now, the way it should, brushing the treetops with that late summer golden haze. Real sunlight. Not the clinical white glow that had soaked the sky just hours before. The breeze had returned too. It danced through the trees, lifting the smell of pine, campfire smoke, even the faint sweetness of someone grilling sausages nearby. I hadn't realized how much I missed smell until that moment. And for a second, just a second, it felt like maybe we had dreamed the whole thing. Maybe we'd gotten turned around on the hike. Maybe the trail just felt strange. Maybe, but I knew better. The stillness, the shadows that didn't move, the stump, the ticking inside the wood. You don't forget something like that. It wasn't a dream. Cassidy let go of my arm and slowly walked to the center of our campsite. She looked down at the fire pit, then up at the sun again, arms crossed tightly over her chest. "I don't like this," she said. "It's too normal, too sudden. I know. Those people," she whispered. "They weren't here. I walked by that site. There was nothing." I know. I didn't say it out loud, but I was thinking the same thing. We hadn't escaped. We'd been let go, or worse, returned. I grabbed my phone again. Full bars now. I checked the compass app. Working. I opened the map. Functioning perfectly. The little blue arrow had stopped spinning. It sat calmly over our location, everything aligned again, and yet everything felt wrong. Cassidy went into the RV without a word. I followed. Inside, the temperature was comfortable. The digital clock on the microwave blinked 6:42 p.m. I stared at it for a long time. She sat on the bed, legs tucked under her, quiet. I grabbed 2 water bottles from the mini fridge and handed her one. She drank it absent-mindedly, eyes fixed on the closed blinds. Then she whispered something that made the hairs on my arms rise. "What if we're not really back?" I didn't answer right away, because deep down I'd been wondering the same thing. "What if we're in a copy?" she said. What if whatever was watching us built this world based on what we expected to see? I sat down beside her slowly. You think we're in a simulation? No, she said. Not a simulation, a loop, a pocket, a replica, like a stage. She looked at me now. Her eyes were red but steady. What if it needed us to believe we got out? I didn't want to go down that path. I didn't want to start unraveling that thread. Because if I did, if I allowed myself to believe that we were still inside whatever had frozen the sun, then it meant we couldn't trust anything. Not the people, not the clocks, not even each other. But that's the problem with terror like this. It lives in implication. It doesn't need to chase you. It just needs to suggest that the world isn't quite right, that time is a story someone is telling you, that reality has edges and you just brushed one. I stood and pulled the curtain back an inch. More RVs had pulled in. Kids were biking the loop. Someone was chopping wood near the back. Music played softly from someone's portable speaker. Normal. Perfectly normal. Cassidy came up behind me, rested her head against my shoulder. I whispered, "We should leave. First light." She nodded against my arm. We slept, or tried to. I lay awake in that narrow-barreled bed for hours, watching the faint lines of the blinds glow silver in the moonlight, listening to the creak of trees outside, to Cassidy's breath. But part of me didn't believe the sun would rise. When morning finally came, a real morning, golden and foggy, with the smell of dew on the needles, I felt a flicker of hope, the normal kind. I started the RV, and we rolled out slowly, the gravel crunching beneath the tires, sunlight dancing across the dash. Cassidy didn't speak for most of the drive, neither did I, until we reached the main road. Then she turned and said quietly, "What did it want from us?" I glanced at her. "I don't know." She shook her head. "It wasn't just watching, it was measuring, listening. It wanted us to see something, or maybe to remember something." I didn't answer. I just kept driving. We passed the last ranger sign, the final marker of the Mount Hood area, and drove another hour before pulling over for gas. I stepped out, stretched my legs, blinked up at the sky. The sun was where it should be. The clouds were moving. The air smelled like fuel and wildflowers. I tried not to think about the stump, about the ticking, about the people who hadn't been there until they were. Cassidy stood beside the pump, arms folded. "You think anyone else has ever gone through something like that?" I looked at her. Maybe, but if they did, would anyone believe them? She smiled faintly. No, they'd sound like us. We got back in the RV and continued west, but I couldn't shake the feeling, like we'd been marked, not in the physical sense. Nothing on our skin, nothing that left a scar, but deep in the mind, a seed planted, a knowledge that the world isn't stable, that time is a suggestion, that daylight might not always be real, and even now, months later, I'll sometimes wake up in the middle of the night, heart pounding, afraid to open the blinds, because what if the sun's still there? Not rising, not falling, just waiting. It's been 6 months since that trip. We haven't been back to Mount Hood, haven't taken the RV out either, not even for a weekend. Cassidy says she's done with camping for now, but it's not the camping that haunts her. It's the silence. The light, the sense that we crossed some invisible line, and once you cross it, things don't ever go back to how they were. Not completely. Sometimes I wake up at 2 or 3 in the morning and just sit in the dark, listening for that stillness, not the peaceful kind, the wrong kind, the kind of quiet that feels like something is holding its breath, waiting to see what you'll do next. Other times, I'll be outside on my porch watching the shadows move across the yard, and I'll get this sudden jolt of terror. Not because something's wrong, but because everything looks too right. Perfect sunlight, perfect breeze, a little too familiar. And I'll wonder, am I still there? Did we ever really leave? Or is this just the version of reality we were given? That's what no one talks about when they tell ghost stories or horror tales or strange encounters in the woods. The aftermath, the psychological residue. Not the fear of what happened, but the fear that what happened changed something inside you, permanently. For me, that change came in the form of doubt. I used to trust what I saw. I believed in maps, in directions, in clocks. I believed in the sun, that it would rise, move, and set like it always had. But when the sun stays still long enough, you start to ask questions no one wants to answer. Cassidy and I have tried to talk about it, to process it together, but it's like trying to describe a color no one else can see. We have shared words, shared moments, but the experience lives in a place beyond language, in the cracks of memory, in the gaps between seconds. Sometimes we argue about it. Silly things. She says the stump was just a dream. I know it wasn't. I remember its warmth, the ticking. I hear it still sometimes. Late at night. Faint, like it's inside my own skull. Not every night, not even every week, but enough that I never forget. Tick, tick, tick. We haven't told anyone what happened. Not really. How do you explain that time stopped, that shadows lost their rules, that reality opened up and let you glimpse whatever's underneath? We did report the weirdness to a ranger station on our way home. Left out the deeper parts, of course. Just said our phones glitched, we got turned around on a trail, saw some strange light. The woman at the desk smiled and nodded like she'd heard it all before, and maybe she had. Before we left, I asked her something I didn't expect to ask. Have you ever heard of anyone else getting lost in time? Her eyes flicked up to mine. Then she said, You mean like when the sun doesn't set? I froze. She smiled again. A few folks say that. Usually happens after a long hike, altitude sickness, dehydration. Minds play tricks. I wanted to press her to ask what she really thought, but Cassidy touched my elbow and whispered, Don't. So we left. And now I carry it quietly, the not knowing, the maybe we got out and maybe we didn't. But here's the part I can't shake, the part that keeps echoing through my thoughts even on the most ordinary days. I don't think it was an accident. I don't think we just stumbled into something unnatural. I think we were chosen, not in some grand destiny way. Not like that. More like an experiment, like two ants wandering too close to the edge of the map, and something above or beneath or behind the world noticed. I think it wanted to see what we'd do. If we'd run, if we'd break, if we'd obey. Because the moment we stopped trying to escape, that's when it moved. That's when the sun dipped. That's when the people returned. So maybe that's what it was measuring. Not our fear, but our response. Would we fight the impossible or accept it? Would we panic or surrender? Would we trust our instincts or override them? It's strange what that place taught me. It taught me that fear isn't always loud. Sometimes it's the hush between questions. Sometimes it's the warmth of a tree stump that shouldn't be warm. Sometimes it's a sunny afternoon that refuses to end. But mostly, it taught me that the world is thinner than we think. That behind the blue sky and birdsong, behind GPS signals and weekend camping trips, something is watching. Not malicious, just curious. And one day it might pull you aside gently, without warning. And you'll find yourself in a world where time stops, where shadows shift, where your senses betray you. And the only way out is stillness, acceptance, silence, until it decides you've seen enough and returns you, changed. I'm not the kind of person you'd expect to hear this from. I'm not a survivalist or someone who believes in ghosts or UFOs. I've lived most of my life in cities, navigating traffic and social obligations, and the only thing I ever really feared was wasting time, sitting in meetings, smiling at people I didn't care about, building a life that felt more like a commercial than a memory. So when the last threads of my old life finally broke, when she left and the job ended with a thank you for your service and a check that felt more like a shrug, I did something I never thought I would. I packed up my 87 Westphalia, filled it with books, dried food, and enough solitude to finally hear myself think. I told no one where I was going. That was the point. No signal, no maps, no expectations, just me, some hand-drawn trails I found online, and the stretch of green that blankets the Appalachian range like a sleeping giant. I didn't mean to disappear. I meant to breathe. It was late September when I crossed into western North Carolina. The trees were just beginning to blush red and amber, and the sun dipped lower each evening like it was pulling the season down with it. I followed the back roads until pavement turned to gravel, then parked the van near a bend in a forgotten fire trail. The forest here didn't feel like a place people came to hike or camp. It felt older, like it had been sealed away in its own time. No trail markers, no trash, no distant highway noise, just the hush of leaves and the occasional creak of branches shifting their weight. Perfect. I set up a minimalist base, hammock, tarp, small fire ring. The van was just a fallback in case of weather. I wanted to sleep out in it under the soft canopy with the kind of quiet you can feel in your teeth. The first night passed uneventfully. I listened to the crackling of my small fire until it gave up the ghost, then drifted off to the chirr of insects and the slow cooling of the ground beneath me. The second night, I woke to wind, or what sounded like wind. It was subtle at first, like distant rustling, a high whine weaving between the trees. I thought maybe it was rain on leaves, but when I opened my eyes, the tarp above me wasn't moving. The trees were motionless, their long arms perfectly still in the moonlight. But the sound continued, a rushing, swirling noise like gusts funneling through a canyon, except there was no movement, no leaves fluttering, no branches swaying, just the sound of wind without the wind itself. I sat up, squinting through the silver gloom. My fire had died completely. The air was dry. I could see my breath, faintly, which was strange. It hadn't been that cold earlier. My skin prickled. I lay back down, telling myself it was some kind of auditory illusion, the ear playing tricks in a silence too deep. Maybe an owl or animal I didn't recognize. But the sound persisted for hours, sometimes moving closer, sometimes circling, always above, never through. When morning came, it vanished as if it had never been there. Birds began chirping. A squirrel startled me by dropping an acorn on my tarp. Everything normal. I brushed it off as oversensitivity, a city mind trying to adjust to wilderness silence. Still, I found myself glancing up into the trees more than usual that day. On the third night, I didn't sleep. I waited. I lay in my hammock, fully clothed, knife in hand, not because I thought I'd need it, but because I needed to feel like I had something. The wind sound came again. This time, earlier, before midnight. It was stronger now, loud, too loud to be natural. It had weight like pressure on the eardrum, and it moved fast, too fast. One moment near my feet, the next above my head, but nothing moved. No breeze on my face, no stirring of my tarp, not even the smoky smell of old campfires being disrupted. And then, something new. A thump, not loud. Just a soft, deliberate weight on the ground nearby, like someone stepping down carefully. Then another, and another. I didn't move, didn't breathe. Whatever it was, it didn't break twigs. It didn't snort or sniff. It just stepped, measured, unhurried, like it knew I was awake and was giving me the chance to listen. Then silence. Not normal silence, but a kind that erased sound. No insects, no breeze, not even my breath, which I must have been holding. I waited like that until dawn, muscles cramped, eyes wide. When I finally got the courage to move, I checked the ground. Nothing. No footprints, no signs of anything living having passed through. I told myself maybe I'd imagined the footsteps. Maybe I'd started dreaming and didn't know it. But I didn't pack up and leave. That's the part that surprises me, even now. I should have. Any reasonable person would have. But something about that place held me. Not with comfort, but with stillness. It was like walking into a room where something just happened and you're too polite or too afraid to ask what. On the fourth day, I went further into the forest. I don't know why. Maybe to prove to myself there was nothing to fear. Maybe because part of me already knew something was wrong and I couldn't look away. I left my camp in the early morning and took only a day pack, compass, filtered water. I followed what looked like an old game trail, barely visible beneath the underbrush. About 3 miles in, I found it. A structure, half collapsed, molded with age. It looked like an old Forest Service shack, or maybe a trapper's cabin. The roof had caved in on one side, and moss had swallowed most of the lower walls. No sign of human activity in decades, but someone had been there recently. I saw a torn sleeping bag, half buried under dry leaves, a rusted kettle near a blackened fire pit, and beside the collapsed doorway, footprints. Not shoe prints. Barefoot, narrow, long-toed, but not fresh, almost like they'd been burned into the dirt, as if heat had pressed them into the soil, leaving the surrounding moss untouched. I didn't go inside. I couldn't. Something about the air inside that ruin felt shut, like it had its own atmosphere. So I turned back, slowly. The forest was silent the entire way back, not peaceful. Alert, like it was watching. I got back to camp just before dusk and locked myself in the van that night. That's when I heard it again, not just the wind sound, but something deeper beneath it. A second frequency, a tone, low, pulsing, almost subsonic. It made my teeth feel loose in my jaw. It wasn't coming from above this time, it was coming from beneath the van. I didn't want to move, not even to look down. Something about that tone, so low it felt like it was vibrating the marrow in my bones, paralyzed me. My first instinct was to turn on the headlights, start the engine, tear out of there. But something inside me hesitated, like I knew, if I moved, whatever was beneath me would respond, like movement was the trigger it was waiting for. So I stayed frozen in the driver's seat, one hand clenched on the keys, the other gripping the steering wheel like it could anchor me to sanity. And then the wind sound returned. Except this time it wasn't circling above. It was inside the van. Not the air moving, but the sound of wind coiling through the interior, rushing in my ears like I was standing in a tunnel. Except there were no open windows. Nothing had shifted. I hoping it was in my head. That's when the side mirror tilted. I didn't touch anything. I watched it. Slow, deliberate, as if someone outside was adjusting it to see in. Then the tone dropped again, deeper, almost imperceptible. But I felt it, in my lungs. My heartbeat slowed without my permission. My vision got darker around the edges. Whatever was beneath me, it didn't move. But it was there, pressing upward, listening. The sound of wind in a windless space. That's the moment I first understood. It wasn't an environmental phenomenon. It wasn't even trying to disguise itself. It was a presence, and I had somehow camped directly on top of it. I don't remember falling asleep. When I woke up, it was morning. I was slumped across the front seats like I'd passed out. The van door was closed. Everything looked normal. Birds chirping, sunlight through the trees. But the rear hatch was open. I hadn't opened it. I never leave it open overnight. And my boots, which I'd left by the driver's side, were gone. I stepped out barefoot, cautious, scanning the woods around the clearing. My pack was untouched. My knife was still tucked into the front seat, but the boots were gone, and in their place was a trail. Not a trail of footprints, a trail of soil, as if something had dug a narrow channel, just an inch or two deep, starting from where the boots had been, curling out into the woods in a wide arc like a snake path. Only it wasn't a snake path. It was perfectly straight, precise, with small, evenly spaced indentations along each side, almost like fingers pulling themselves forward. I followed it 20 feet before I stopped myself. Whatever had taken my boots hadn't taken anything else. It wanted me barefoot, vulnerable, anchored. My feet were already stinging from the cold earth and the sharp litter of leaves and twigs, and I suddenly realized I hadn't heard a single sound since waking up. No birds, no squirrels, nothing. The forest was holding its breath. I didn't waste time. I threw everything I could into the van, jammed the key into the ignition, and peeled out, bouncing over roots and rocks, ignoring the scraping underneath, the groaning of the suspension. I didn't care if the van cracked in half. I just had to move. But the road was gone. I know that sounds impossible. I knew exactly where I came in from. The fire trail curved around a ravine and led out to the logging path where I'd first seen that rusted gate and the road closed washout sign. But now the ravine wasn't there. The road split where it shouldn't have. The trees looked wrong, like they'd shifted places overnight, lining up in unnatural symmetry. Too neat, too evenly spaced. I drove for 15 minutes before I realized I was circling, passing the same uprooted stump again and again, even though I never turned. I shut off the engine. The van was hot now, radiator ticking angrily. I stepped out barefoot into the dirt and tried to collect my thoughts. That's when I saw the tree. There was a shape in its bark, charred black into its side like a brand. 5 long marks, dragging downward. Almost like handprints. Not human. Longer, bonier. Deep enough to gouge the wood. And right below it, nestled at the base like an offering, were my boots, perfectly upright. Untouched. I didn't move for a long time, because I knew, if I reached for them, I'd have to choose. Stay and accept the rules of whatever game I'd walked into, or leave them and keep moving, barefoot, afraid, uncertain, but unclaimed. I left the boots, got in the van, and drove in the opposite direction. Eventually, after another hour of winding roads and impossible dead ends, I broke through to a clearing I didn't recognize. Flat grass, a broken-down corral, some rusting metal drums. Civilization, or what used to be. I don't remember how I got to the main road. I don't remember most of that day. But I got out. That night, in a motel 2 towns over, I took the van in for service. They lifted it on the hydraulic jack and called me into the bay about 10 minutes later. The mechanic pointed underneath. "You got something wedged in there," he said. "Must have picked it up off-road." He showed me a long, narrow piece of wood jammed between the exhaust pipe and rear axle. Charred. Shaped like a spine. It wasn't from any tree he could name. I told him to throw it out. He didn't. He set it aside behind the shop, and I didn't argue. That was 3 months ago. I haven't gone back to the woods since. I sold the van a week later, bought a bike, rented an apartment in Asheville with street noise and garbage trucks and people yelling into their phones outside. But sometimes, when the apartment gets too quiet, I hear it, that sound again, wind. Not in the trees, in the walls. It started about 2 weeks after I moved in. At first, I thought it was just the plumbing. This place is old, converted textile housing from the 40s with thin walls and thinner insulation. You expect creaks and moans and strange little noises at night. That's what I told myself anyway. But this wasn't settling beams or faulty pipes. It was the same as before. That rushing sound, like pressure pushing through a narrow channel. The sound of wind, but no air moving. Nothing brushing my face, no draft through the windows, just that deep, bone-dry, unnatural whoosh, as though something were passing through the structure or within it. It happened late at night, always after 2 a.m., always when the building was dead quiet, and always for exactly 2 minutes. I timed it, and the worst part, it didn't come from outside. It came from inside the walls, sometimes from the vents, sometimes from the floorboards. Once, from the tiny gap between my bed frame and the wall, loud enough that it vibrated the mattress, and I had to get up and sit on the kitchen floor just to feel like I wasn't being listened to. I tried all the usual things, white noise, earplugs, music. I even started keeping a notebook to log when it happened, just in case it was something explainable. But the more I tracked it, the less sense it made. The times didn't line up with anything. Not neighbors. Not traffic patterns, not heating cycles. And then in the margins of those notes, I started seeing something I hadn't remembered writing. Small sideways marks, like tally lines. 5 at a time, then another 5, then more. Always slanted, always drawn in the same corner. I'd tear out the page, throw it away, and the next day it would happen again. And with them, the dreams began. Not full nightmares, just flashes, moments. I'd be walking in a forest where the trees were perfectly still, but the sound of wind pressed from all sides like an invisible hand. I'd dream of standing barefoot in mud, watching something shape itself from shadow between the tree trunks, tall, narrow, jointed wrong. I'd wake up shaking, sometimes with my ears ringing, sometimes with my mouth full of dirt I hadn't eaten, and always, with that sound fading as I opened my eyes. It wasn't a dream anymore. I knew that. I just didn't want to admit it. The final break came 3 nights ago. I was sitting in the apartment around 2:15 a.m., trying not to fall asleep when the sound started again. Only this time it was louder and closer. It came from the hallway. I turned off the lights, sat perfectly still. Then movement. a soft creak on the floorboards, slow, measured, like someone walking heel to toe, dragging slightly. I knew that sound. It was the same cadence I'd heard outside my hammock back in North Carolina, only now it was inside my home. I didn't grab a weapon. I didn't check the door. I just sat there, knees pulled to my chest, breathing as quietly as I could, eyes wide in the dark. And then, through the grainy sliver between my bedroom door and the floor, I saw it. Shadow. Not shaped like a person. Too narrow. Too tall. It didn't pass like a person walking past a light. It bent the light. Warped it. Like heat on asphalt. Like something you're not supposed to see, but your brain shows you anyway. And then it stopped. Right outside my door. I couldn't breathe. I swear I stopped my heart by force of will alone. It just stood there. No sound. No movement. And then it crouched, slowly, until two long, pale shapes reached beneath the door. Fingers, not human. Bone thin. Crooked, like joints bent in the wrong direction. They didn't scratch. They didn't tap. They touched the floor. Searching. Feeling. I couldn't scream. I couldn't even blink. And then, just as suddenly as it came, it pulled back. The hallway creaked again. Then silence. I stayed there until the sun came up. I don't remember falling asleep, but I woke to light and the sound of cars outside. Normal. Safe. Except when I stood up and looked at the floor by the door, there were 5 long smudges of dirt, as if something had pressed its hand flat against the floor and waited. That was the last night I stayed in that apartment. I didn't even pack. I left the keys on the counter, drove to a different town, and used the last of my savings on a month-to-month sublet in a high-rise with no trees for miles. But I know that doesn't matter. Because this thing, whatever it is, it's not tied to that forest. It's not tied to the place. It's tied to me. To whatever happened that night in the woods. To whatever I stepped over or stood on or slept beneath. I think I woke it up, and now it follows. It doesn't attack, doesn't reveal itself fully. It waits, watches, and it brings that impossible sound with it. Wind. Where there is no wind. Sometimes now, when I walk past buildings at night or drive down empty streets, I look up and see windows, dark and still, until, just for a second, the curtain shifts. Not from a breeze, not from air, but from something watching back. Something tall. Something waiting. And every so often, when the silence deepens and my ears adjust to the nothingness, I hear it again. Just for a second, that long, slow exhale, like breath through a hollow, like wind in a windless room. And I know it hasn't left. It never will. I didn't go to the Jedediah Smith Redwoods to be alone, at least not consciously. I told myself it was about the trees. I'd seen photos, heard stories, watched drone videos with orchestral music playing underneath them, like some kind of digital pilgrimage. But when I finally drove my RV up through the twisting back roads of Northern California, hauling everything I needed behind me, I think I knew. I wasn't just chasing beauty. I was running from something. Maybe myself. I was 34, divorced recently, no kids, just a dog, Gus, a quiet old Labrador with tired eyes and a stronger heart than mine. I had left behind a house filled with ghosts that weren't actually dead, and I pointed my rig north toward a kind of wild silence I hoped might drown out the echoes. Jedediah Smith Redwoods felt like the end of the world. Not in the apocalyptic sense, but the edge of something, the border between time and myth, silence and memory. It's not just that the trees are big. Everyone says that. It's that they feel old. Too old, like they were watching long before we started counting time. When I parked at my site 22, tucked far back from the others, I shut off the engine and just sat there in the sudden hush. I could hear my own heartbeat in my ears, and I realized for the first time in a while, I felt small, and that felt honest. The ranger who checked me in was polite but quiet, a little too quiet. Older guy, leathery face, no name tag, just handed me the site map, warned me that cell service would be non-existent, told me to respect the space. Don't dig, don't carve, and don't wander too far at night, he said with a calm finality that lingered longer than it should have. That first night, I cooked over the fire and watched Gus sniff around the base of the trees. He seemed unusually tense, ears up, tail stiff, nose darting from one scent to the next, like he was reading a book I couldn't see. But it was his way. He was always more alert in new places. After dinner, I walked a little ways down the trail behind my site, just enough to stretch my legs before turning in. The canopy overhead was so thick it swallowed the sky whole. No stars, no moon, just layers of black on deeper black. And yet, somehow, the forest glowed. Not literally, but it felt like the trees themselves emitted some low, steady energy. Like a pressure in the air, barely perceptible but constant, like a faint hum just below hearing. That's when I saw it. Just off the trail, maybe 15 feet into the brush, something caught my eye. A root, huge, thick, gnarled, rising from the earth like the hand of something buried. But it wasn't the size or shape that made me stop. It was the movement. It pulsed. I stood there, absolutely still, watching it. It wasn't wind. The air was dead calm. And it wasn't a trick of light. I had my flashlight, and the beam was steady. This thing, it rose from the soil like the root of a fallen giant, thick and bark covered, and every few salts it would pulse outward, not violently, gently like a breath or a heartbeat. I stared at it for what felt like minutes. I don't remember moving, but I must have, because when I came back to myself, I was back on the trail, heart hammering, flashlight off. Gus was at my side, staring at me like I'd just disappeared. Back at the RV, I locked every door, closed every blind, and told myself I'd just been tired, overstimulated. The redwoods are vast, ancient things. They play tricks on the brain, right? Roots don't pulse. That's not a thing. Still, I didn't sleep much that night. The dream started on the second night. I saw fire. Not a wildfire, but a circle, contained, ritualistic. There were figures around it, their faces unclear, their clothes wrong somehow. Too simple. Cloaks, hands outstretched, chanting. A language I didn't know, but somehow felt deep and old and full of weight. I woke up covered in sweat, Gus whining low beside the bed, his paw pressed to my chest like he was trying to wake me. "Bad dream, buddy," I whispered. "Just a bad dream." But when I stepped outside with my coffee that morning, something in the air had shifted. The woods felt closer, tighter. The birds weren't singing. No wind. Just that deep, pressing stillness, like the forest was holding its breath. I walked the same trail again, as if to prove to myself that what I saw the night before wasn't real. But the root was still there. It was bigger, wider than I remembered, almost fresh, like it had broken the surface recently, even though it looked aged and bark-covered. I stepped closer this time. My feet felt heavy, like the ground didn't want me there. When I knelt down, I placed my hand on the root's surface, and I felt it. A thrum, soft but steady, like touching the side of a bass drum after it struck. It was alive. I should have left right then, should have packed up the rig, turned around and driven until the redwoods were nothing more than a memory, but I didn't. Part of me didn't want to run anymore. Another part, the deeper, darker part, was curious, maybe even drawn to it. That night, the dreams grew clearer. The figures spoke to me now, not with words, but with meaning, and I understood them, not with my ears, but in my bones. You heard us. You came. I woke up with dirt on my hands and knees. My socks were wet with morning dew. The RV door was closed but unlocked. Gus was asleep on the floor but restless, his paws twitching like he was chasing something in his sleep. I didn't remember leaving, but I knew I had. And worse, I wanted to go back. I didn't say anything to the ranger when I saw him that morning. He drove past in a dusty utility vehicle, gave a curt nod. I nodded back, but I couldn't meet his eyes. There was a strange weight to my silence, like if I said out loud what I thought I'd done the night before, it would make it real. And I wasn't ready for that. I told myself I'd been sleepwalking, maybe even dreaming, but I'd never sleepwalked before. And the dirt on my hands wasn't imagined. The ache in my knees. The distinct smell of that forest floor, wet moss, decomposing bark, that damp earth sweetness you don't forget once it's in your lungs. The root had called me. That much I knew. I didn't hike again that day. I stayed near the site, cooked breakfast, tried to distract myself with repairs I didn't need to do. tightening bolts, checking tire pressure. Gus wouldn't leave the shaded area under the picnic table. He watched the tree line with unblinking suspicion. His water sat untouched. That worried me more than anything else. By noon, I started hearing things. It wasn't voices at first, just sounds, off-pattern echoes, rhythms that belong, a low groaning that rose and fell with no wind, the metallic ping of something tapping the side of the RV even when I was sitting right beside it. And then the voices started. At first it was a whisper, faint like a radio just beyond the edge of signal, a murmur. Repeating. Latin, I think. I didn't recognize the words, but the rhythm felt almost liturgical. Ancient. The kind of thing that wasn't meant to be heard in daylight. When dusk fell, I made a decision. I grabbed a headlamp, filled a thermos with coffee, and took my hunting knife. Not for protection, really. More like a piece of the normal world. Something sharp, something known. Gus tried to follow, but I told him to stay. He didn't argue. That scared me more than if he had. The forest at night is a different country. It closes in around you. No matter how good your flashlight is, the beam never seems to reach far enough. Every step feels muffled, like the dirt swallows sound, but I kept walking, deeper than before. Past the route, past the trail. My boots found their way through bramble and moss like they knew the path better than I did. And then I saw it. A clearing I swear hadn't been there before. Perfectly round, surrounded by trees older than civilization. In the center, nothing but soil. Black, rich, unearthed. And in the center of that, the root. Not just one now. A tangle, a mass. Like something reaching up from the underworld, frozen mid-rise, and it pulsed. This time, the movement was undeniable. The ground around it moved with every throb, subtle but rhythmic, like a breath, like a call. I stepped forward, trembling. The whispering grew louder, not outside, but inside me. Not words. Instructions. I dropped to my knees, dug with my bare hands. I don't know why I did it. I wasn't afraid. I felt obedient, like I'd been waiting my whole life for this moment and only now realized it. The soil gave way easily, unnaturally, like it wanted me to dig. Then my fingers found something that wasn't wood, smooth, cold, curved. I yanked it free and stumbled back. A piece of bone. Long, not animal, not fresh, but unmistakably human. I stared at it in the beam of my headlamp, my breath fogging the air in short bursts. My fingers trembled, my stomach turned. The bone was clean, but the earth around it was wet, dark and thick. I dropped it. It made no sound when it hit the soil. That's when I heard it, clear as my own name. A whisper inches from my ear. Return what was taken. I spun, headlamp flaring against the trees. No one there. I stumbled backward, tripping over roots, gasping. The chanting surged in my skull now, not outside, but inside, like blood rushing through my brain. I ran. Not toward the RV, not toward anything I recognized. Just away. Branches tore at my arms. My knife was gone. I didn't even remember dropping it. My flashlight flickered, dimmed, died, and the forest swallowed me whole. I don't know how long I ran. Time didn't work right out there. At some point, I collapsed in a patch of ferns, wheezing, bleeding, shaking so hard I couldn't feel my fingers. That's where Gus found me. He didn't bark, just padded up beside me and laid down, pressing his body against mine like he was trying to keep me tethered to the present. His breath was calm, steady. I clung to that, curled my fingers into his fur and whispered, "Okay, we're okay." But I didn't believe it. Eventually, I made it back to the RV. I don't remember the walk. The next thing I knew, I was locking the door behind me and collapsing on the floor. I didn't shower, didn't eat. I just lay there beside Gus until the sky turned pale gray through the blinds. And I dreamed again. This time I wasn't just watching, I was part of it. The circle, the figures, the fire, the chant. I was one of them. And I knew somehow that this had happened before. That the forest wasn't haunted in the traditional sense. It was ancient, sentient, a memory wrapped in root and soil, and I had stirred it. When I woke, the bone was on my pillow, clean, dry, laid out like an offering. I didn't scream. I just sat up, stared at it. My hands didn't shake. Something in me had shifted, like a gear locking into place. I wasn't a visitor anymore. I was claimed. I didn't leave. I should have. Everything in me, what was left of the old me, anyway, screamed to go, to grab Gus, to throw the gear into the RV, and to peel down that forest road until pavement and street lights and cell towers surrounded me again. But I didn't leave. Instead, I made coffee. I moved slowly, methodically, like I was performing a ritual I didn't remember learning. I fed Gus, though he barely touched his food. I stepped outside and breathed in the cold, damp air. The fog sat low over the campground, clinging to the trunks of the trees like a second skin. The light was weak, gray, filtered like the forest was trying to hold back the sun. I stood there, sipping, staring at the tree line. The root was out there, and so was the bone, still on my pillow, waiting. It hadn't moved, hadn't changed, but it had presence now, like a totem or a demand. It didn't matter what I believed. The forest had already decided I was part of the story. That day passed in pieces. Time broke itself into fragments. I cleaned the fire pit. I reread a dog-eared copy of Into the Wild. I walked circles around the campground, not going far, not trusting myself. I caught myself staring too long at trees, their bark patterns swirling into unfamiliar symbols. Gus wouldn't come with me anymore, not past the edge of the gravel. He just sat and watched, always facing the same direction, toward the root. By the time night fell, I was too exhausted to pretend I was in control. I lay in bed, eyes open, staring at the ceiling. The dreams didn't wait for sleep anymore. I heard them even with my eyes wide, the voices, the pull, that low hum beneath everything, like a generator buried deep beneath the soil, vibrating through the earth's bones. Then I saw the man. He was standing at the edge of my campsite, not moving, just watching, old, thin, face half in shadow. His hands hung at his sides, limp and silent. I blinked. He didn't vanish, just stood there like a forgotten statue. I stepped outside, heart in my throat. Hello? My voice sounded alien. Weak. The word didn't echo. It just stopped, eaten by the forest. The man turned, not his body, just his face. Just enough to let me know that he saw me. And then he spoke, quietly, his voice like wind rustling through dry bark. You shouldn't have dug. I took one step forward, and he was gone. Not vanished into the trees, just no longer there, like he'd never been. I didn't sleep after that. The hours passed like cold molasses. I made tea I didn't drink. I checked the locks even though I knew they meant nothing out here. Gus pressed against the RV's door all night, ears twitching, growling low every time I so much as shifted in bed. At dawn, I heard something outside. Not footsteps, not rustling. Breathing. Heavy. Rhythmic. Close. I opened the blinds slowly. Nothing. Just fog and trees and silence. But the ground near the trail had changed. It was raised. A small mound of freshly turned soil, right where I'd found the root. I didn't want to look, but I had to. I stepped outside barefoot, my skin instantly soaked from the dew. Each step toward that mound felt heavier than the last, like walking into gravity that didn't belong to this world. When I reached it, I knelt. The dirt wasn't cold. It was warm, pulsing. I laid my palm flat against it, and I heard something. Not with my ears, with my bones. A word. Repeating. Subsider. It echoed in my ribs, my teeth, my spine. Latin. I looked it up later. It means to sink, to settle, to yield. That day, I tried to leave. I packed everything, pulled the slide in, loaded the gear, started the engine. Gus was already inside, tail wagging, desperate to go. I turned the key. The RV rumbled to life and then died. Completely. Lights, dash, engine, gone. I tried again. Nothing. Battery was fine, fuel full, no alarms, no error codes, nothing visibly wrong. I checked everything I knew to check. I even climbed underneath the rig, covered in grease and pine needles, desperate to find something mechanical to blame. But I knew. The forest wasn't letting me go. So I tried to walk. I leashed Gus, grabbed my pack, left the RV behind. We followed the road out of the campsite toward the ranger station, 2 miles up. We didn't make it far. Half a mile in, Gus stopped. His whole body stiffened. Hackles up, he growled, not at something ahead, but behind. I turned. Nothing. But the forest felt wrong. The trees looked different. Closer. Bent, like they'd shifted when I wasn't watching. Gus pulled backward. He wanted to run. I didn't blame him. That's when I saw the figure again. Same man. Same silence. But this time he was closer, in the middle of the road, just standing there, and there were others behind him now, shapes in the mist, watching. I didn't move, I didn't breathe. Then they all spoke together, not in unison, not like people, more like the wind learning a language. It must be returned. I dropped the pack, turned. Gus ran, I followed. By the time we reached the RV, I was soaked with sweat, lungs burning. The forest was silent again, too silent. I walked straight to the bed and picked up the bone. It was warm. It pulsed like a heart. I didn't know what to do with the bone. Bury it? Burn it? Break it? I stood in the middle of the RV holding it like a relic, as if any wrong move might offend whatever presence had claimed this forest. And now, me. Gus paced the floor, whimpering, ears pressed flat, tail curled between his legs. Every few seconds he would glance at the door like he expected it to burst inward. And so did I, because something was coming. I could feel it. Not just around me, inside me. The same way a storm makes your bones ache hours before the clouds roll in. A pressure, a warning. I opened the drawer, wrapped the bone in a flannel shirt, and shoved it deep into my pack. The moment I zipped it shut, the lights in the RV flickered, then died. Silence fell like a blanket. Even the insects stopped. No hum, no buzz, not even a rustle of leaves, just stillness, thick and heavy like the world itself had gone underwater. And then the knocking began. Slow, rhythmic. Tap, tap, tap. At first, I thought it was coming from the back window, then the side, then the roof. It wasn't one knock, it was dozens surrounding me, encircling the RV like invisible hands pressing in from all sides. I backed into the corner, clutching the pack like it might save me. Gus barked, a sharp, desperate sound that cut the silence like a scream. He launched himself at the door, teeth bared, as if whatever was outside was already inside his head. Then the knock stopped. Not faded, just gone. I stood there, trembling, for what felt like hours. Then I heard my name, not shouted, not whispered, spoken, right outside the RV door, a voice that wasn't a voice, not male, not female, not even human, really. It just was. Elias. I'd never told anyone my name out here. I hadn't spoken it aloud in days. I stepped forward, almost against my will, hand on the door handle. Then, movement in the corner of my eye. I turned just in time to see it. A face at the window. Pale, gaunt, not angry, just watching. I slammed the blinds shut, my heart hammering so loud I couldn't hear myself think. I had to get out. I had to end this. I grabbed the pack, clipped on Gus's leash, and ran. Not to the road. Not to help. To the root. Because deep down I knew this wouldn't stop. It would follow me. It was me now. And it wanted something returned. The forest welcomed me like an old friend. The moment I crossed the trailhead, the fog parted. The trees leaned inward. The path seemed clearer, even though I knew I'd never taken this exact route before. And still, my feet knew the way. The clearing was waiting, wider now. The root mound had risen even higher, nearly waist level. Around it the ground shimmered, as if the air itself was vibrating. I stepped into the circle, and time bent. I could feel it. Memory woven into bark and earth. Visions flashed behind my eyes. Firelight, chanting, blood-soaked soil. The echo of voices too old to trace. I fell to my knees. Unzipped the pack. Unwrapped the bone. The moment it touched the air, the forest exhaled. The trees shuddered. The wind picked up, not from above, but from beneath the soil. A low, ancient breath, pushing up from the roots like a sigh from something long buried, and finally awakening. And then they emerged. The figures, shadows with faces, not ghosts, not hallucinations, memories made flesh. I wasn't afraid anymore, not in the way I had been. What I felt now was deeper, older. The bone glowed faintly in the mist, and I knew what I had to do. I pressed it into the mound, gently, reverently. It sank into the soil like a key finding its lock. The wind stopped, the light dimmed, and the forest went silent. Truly silent. Not absence of sound silent, but peace. Like a war had just ended. The shadows faded, the ground settled, the root stopped pulsing. And I cried, not from fear, not from relief, from recognition. Because in that moment I understood. This wasn't about punishment. It was about balance. A trespass had been made, maybe not by me, maybe not in this century, but the wound was still open. And the forest doesn't forget. It waits, it whispers, and when the time is right, it calls you home. The clearing emptied itself like a breath released. The trees didn't sway anymore. They stood tall and still, like sentinels satisfied that justice, whatever version of it they recognized, had been served. I didn't feel triumphant. I didn't feel safe. What I felt was hollow, a silence inside me where panic used to live. Gus sat beside me, his breathing even again. His eyes were on the forest, not wide with fear this time, but wide with knowing. He hadn't barked once since I laid the bone down. He just watched, like he understood this moment was older than us both. I stood. My legs shook, but I made them move, step by step. No fanfare, no noise, just me, my dog, and the long walk back through the redwoods. And here's the thing. The forest didn't fight me. It let me go. No more voices, no more shapes in the mist. The path that had seemed to bend and twist now felt straight. The trees no longer loomed, they observed, like priests seeing off a sinner who'd finally confessed something that wasn't his fault but was his burden anyway. Back at the RV, everything looked exactly as I left it, except for the scratches. Long, deep gouges down both sides of the vehicle, like claws or roots had dragged themselves across the metal. I ran my hand along one, fresh. The aluminum peeled slightly at the edges. I didn't remember hearing it happen, but I knew what it meant. A mark, a reminder. You don't come back from something like this without something coming back with you. I climbed into the driver's seat and turned the key. The engine started on the first try. I laughed, a hollow, cracked sound that scared me more than any whisper ever had. I didn't stay for a final hike. Didn't say goodbye to the ranger. I just pulled out of Site 22 and rolled back down that narrow road, never looking in the rearview mirror. Gus didn't move the whole drive. We hit cell service about 20 miles out. Missed calls, emails, the noise of the world roaring back into my ears like a wave I didn't know how to surf anymore. I turned the phone off. What I just left behind didn't belong in a status update. 2 weeks later, I parked the RV behind my sister's house in Bend, Oregon. She asked me why I looked so thin, why I jumped when the wind hit the trees the wrong way. I told her I'd had a rough patch, that I needed some quiet. She left it at that. God bless her. But every night, I'd wake up just after 2 a.m. every single night, and I'd hear it, not outside the RV, not in the woods beyond the house. Inside me. A hum, a whisper, a rhythm, low, deep, steady, like a root pulsing beneath the floorboards of my chest. Sometimes I dreamed in Latin, words I never studied, never knew I knew. I'd wake up with dirt on my palms. I started sleeping with socks on just in case. I tried therapy. Didn't help. What do you tell a therapist? That a forest called you by name? Yeah. That it used your hands to return the bones of some long-dead ritual to the soil, like sealing a pact you never signed? That something woke up beneath the redwoods? And that it saw you? I didn't say any of that. I just stopped going. One night, Gus started growling again. He hadn't done that since we left Jedediah Smith. I got up, checked the windows. Nothing. The wind was still. The stars were out. But the next morning, there was a patch of disturbed soil in the backyard. Small, circular, like a mound. I didn't touch it, didn't ask, just nodded and whispered, I understand. Because I do. I finally do. I didn't go back to camping after that. Not for months. The thought of woods, any woods, tightened something in my chest. Even the gentle trees behind my sister's house felt taller than they should have, like they were watching me with secrets they weren't quite ready to say aloud. But I still lived in the RV. I couldn't bring myself to sleep in a house again. Too many walls, too many rules, too much separation from the kind of wild thing I now understood was always just a few feet beneath our lives. Because once you feel it, that heartbeat in the earth, you don't forget. You don't unlearn it. It's like music now, just at the edge of hearing. A song older than God. I started researching, not the tourist blogs or the hiking forums. I went deep, anthropology records, early settler journals, indigenous stories, most of them unrecorded, passed through whispers, translated by time and trauma. That's when I found it. A pattern. People disappearing in those woods over centuries, not en masse, not sensationally, quietly, a few every decade. Always near Jedediah Smith. Always campers, always those who dug too deep. One man in 1908 wrote a letter home before vanishing. There is a tree here unlike the others. It pulses as if it breathes. I think I've made a mistake. Another in 1974 left behind a journal. Pages filled with dreams of Latin voices and spirals in the dirt. Nobody noticed the connections because they didn't want to, because the forest doesn't want to be understood. It just wants to be remembered. The redwoods are older than history, older than language. Some of the ones standing today were seedlings before Christ ever drew breath, and they've seen things, buried things, things we paved over, cut down, and tried to forget. But not everything forgets us. Some things wait, and when they call, they don't call lightly. So why me? I've asked that 1,000 times. Maybe I was just the next person dumb enough to camp too close to follow a whisper to touch the root. Or maybe it wasn't random. Maybe it wanted someone to return that bone, to put the memory back where it belonged. Maybe the forest chose me because I'd already lost something myself, because I was already half haunted. I don't pretend to know, but I feel it. Even now, parked in the high desert, far from California's northern lines, surrounded by sagebrush and sky, I still feel it. That hum, that rhythm, that subtle, low frequency like an old drum beat echoing through the soles of my feet. I've come to see it as a kind of pact. I returned what wasn't mine, and in doing so I inherited something else. Not power, not insight, permission to remember, to tell you. Because that's what it wanted, I think. Not worship, not sacrifice. Witness. We build our camps thinking we're visitors, temporary guests in nature's house. But the truth is darker than that. We're not guests, we're trespassers. The redwoods don't grow around us, we grow on their bones, and sometimes they remember. And that's the story. I've told it the only way I know how. Honest, without drama, without denial. You don't have to believe me. Honestly, I'm not sure you should. But if you find yourself someday in Jedediah Smith redwoods, maybe alone, maybe by a fire, maybe walking just a little too far off trail, and you see a root that doesn't quite look like the others, don't touch it. Don't dig. Don't listen, because once it knows your name, it never forgets.